Hello, everyone out there in the world today. This is Friday, January 24th, 2025. This is Erica Swenson Elliott, and I am sharing some of the research I have done and conducted and am still working with over the last couple of years. And I'm working it into the next book in my calendar novel series here. So I have the first trilogy done and published and you know available for purchase. The first trilogy is the Winter collection and has these three books in it: January, February, March. So clearly there's going to be at least 12 books in this spiritual fiction series that I've been working on. I think it was January 2019 was when we got the first one out. I had April novel pretty much completed, but I felt like I was missing some spiritual themes, so I just kind of set it aside for a little bit, and then that's going to hopefully come out by this April. So I'm going to talk to you today about the kind of secret society underlying mysterious connections between one of my geographical locations that I'm going to be using and how it's connected to the immigration into America. So that area is Cornwall in England, or the Cornish. The Cornishmen, as some people call themselves, including my ancestor. So it's just about this series. What if we discover every action taken creates an invisible imprint on eternity? This is a tapestry of woven stories from one soul group working through time and space. As they journey towards their own growth, they unlock mysteries, expose dark secrets, and heal old wounds. So if you just want to try it out, the January novel one, that one's pretty short, small. That you could just try the one book. It's like I think 120 pages. And then these are a little bit larger, like I think 230 a piece. But you can get it in the trilogy in hardcover as a gift for someone might be nice, paperback and Kindle versions. I'm not on Audible yet. That is a future goal, but I'm going to come up to the Google Maps that I was using for Cornwall, and I probably should say, hopefully you can see this. Where is she? I want to give some credit here to my grandmother. Let's see, I think she's on page 7. Sorry, I moved her around. There she is. So here's Sweetie, yours truly, Ann Pascoe. Her father, his family emigrated from Cornwall, and their last name was Pascoe, which is a very common name in the Cornwall area. And if some of you that are fans of BBC or PBS, you might have seen the Poldark Saga series, which is based on a series of books. And the name Pascoe is a common name of some of the supporting characters in that Poldark Saga book, and that's based around the American Revolutionary War time frame. So, from a perspective, they have a very distinctive, like kind of separate character. If you can see, like, because they're kind of down here on this tip and isolated from the rest of England. So Nana would not say she was half English. She would say she's half Cornish. And, she was like second or third generation in America. So it's kind of interesting that, she still spoke that way. Um, and what I'm building up in the book series and doing these videos and sharing them with you helps me to organize my thoughts and the themes that we're covering, and it actually sometimes brings me more clarity about the theme. Um, this area in Philadelphia is called Bensalem, and Philadelphia is the southeast corner of the state of Pennsylvania in the United States of America. So Philadelphia is a kind of a halfway point between New York City and Washington, D.C. And if you follow Masonic Freemasonry legends, like they're all on a specific line. and designed and dropped on that line. It wasn't by accident per se. So Bensalem is the first township outside of the city of Philadelphia. And you can see here there's a Cornwell's Heights. So that's kind of like a reference to, let's see if I can get to terrain here so we can, it's like less. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay. So the township of Bensalem is been there since like the 1680s. It was founded by 12 Cornishmen when the English came there. They weren't the first ones there, obviously. So I'm going to start reading to you about that. And this research came, I want to give credit where credit is due. The Bensalem Historical Society, which I was a teenager when this was founded, and I was actually living in Bensalem. I have these three books. Here's the first one here. You can order them from their website. You can get used ones, online on different, um, like on eBay. Okay. So I'm going to start reading to you, and then I'll kind of flip around. This is from what I've discovered thus far and the connections between American suburbia, a secret society in Cornwall, England. The threads of a story. What's in a name? Sir Francis Bacon. Let's come to here. The New Atlantis is his book here, or The Voyage to the Land of the Rosicrucians by Francis Bacon. Rosicrucians is a secret society, and for those of you that listen to Dark Journalist on YouTube channel, he has spent a lot of time explaining them and referencing them into his work. So here we go. Premise, connecting the dots between American suburbia and a secret society. And today I'm reading into the record my notes for my upcoming books in the calendar novel series. Bensalem is the place name that Sir Francis Bacon coined for his magical island in his secret utopian novel, The New Atlantis. This book was first secretly published immediately following his death, which was 60 years before Bensalem, Pennsylvania was chartered by its British Quaker founders. Groudon was a primary founder of Bensalem, and he was from Cornwall, England. Ironically, Cornwall, England is where Sir Francis Bacon won his first constituency seat in the House of Commons. Bacon was alive from 1561 to 1620 is when he died, and then I think this book was published like the next year after. So coming back to me, Erica, I lived in Bensalem, the township, from 1978 to 1994. The township is adjacent to the most northeastern edge of Philadelphia. I spent the formative years of 10 through 25 coming of age in this bustling suburban crossroad of Americana. To me, it intuitively feels we imprint the land where our souls have trod in times past, whether that be in this lifetime or maybe before. What we do and feel indelibly leaves a magical mark in the terra firma. It explains to me why when we arrive in a new place and we experience deja vu or just a sense of comfortable belonging. For me, Bensalem and Philly both felt that way when I lived and grew up there. It was my hometown on multiple levels. When the Philly skyline loomed up on the horizon, it always gave me a smile. So now I understand maybe on a deeper level why. The historical explanation for how the township was named Bensalem never really rang true to me, like many of the other historical tales that are taught to us in school. Intuitively, there seemed to be more to it, something I could not really put my finger on. And what was it? Names do mean something. They create an energy imprint and can redirect outcomes. What's in a name, as we say? My curious mind wanted to know. So I filed it away in one of my open question mental files on the back shelf of my brain. Through the course of my lifetime as an exuberant reader, I read broadly across many topics. Based on my own gained knowledge, studying secret societies and recent connections with esoteric experts, I have finally come to my conclusion about this mysterious puzzle. You may agree with me, you may not. You might have some more information that'll help me expand. Even if it is only for myself and no one else cares, but if you are a curious soul too, read along with me, listen to my voice, discover how the mysterious genius of Sir Francis Bacon is all wrapped up and embedded in my teenage suburban America, where he never stepped foot or ever laid his gaze. But before I start unpacking this, let me acknowledge my mother with gratitude. I lost her in 2022 as she completed her sacred passage to the heavenly realm. And now that both of my parents have gone ahead of me, new lines of thought recently started to form some patterns. Lines of love, loss, ancestry, and geography, all driving deeper personal meaning. Recurring lives circling back to places and soul groups for better completion of our spiritual work. My mom was dubbed the story lady when she was a school teacher. She loved preserving histories and ancestry through storytelling, writing, and note taking. So much so, I teasingly called her our family archivist. Over the last few days of her life, as she lingered, we read to her scripture passages and chapters from her published memoir, stories of our ancestors and our lives. Her final gift to us, a 400-page reminder defining who we all were and where we came from. So this particular story that I'm weaving here, I know is making her proud of at least my effort as I continue her tradition of the story lady. When I grew up in Bensalem, it was morphing from centuries of farming into a teeming suburbia as Philadelphians fled the urban crime wave of the 1970s, spawned from the drug wave of the 1960s. Since I spent the previous and initial decade of my life in Center City, I knew exactly what that could look like, and even through the eyes of a young child sheltered by a very protective mother. But when I was 10, Pop accepted a Methodist transfer to Bensalem for his next church. I missed the bustling sounds of the city at first during my adjustment, but I definitely own a taste for adventure and discovery, so I was ready to adapt to a new challenge. If you go through the first chapter of Traveling Through Bensalem, and that's this book right here, so you can find this, used copies, but you can get them at a really good price if they have them in print still at the Bensalem Historical Society.com I have highlighted here, but you can get used ones, from the web. So when I read through the first chapter, published in 1984 by the Township's Historical Society, it attributes one theory to its name. Regarding the key contributors to this detailed, historically accurate book, I personally knew. It was Mrs. Ruth Rees, Rees. The book is composed from a scouring of many local historical records and personal histories. Our church's parsonage, which is the house that the church owned that we lived in as the minister's family, was our home was in Mrs. Reese's neighborhood. It was called Glen Ashton Farms. I was friends with her son Jeff, actually, and Jeff and I jokingly addressed each other with "Howdy, neighbor." We thought it was hilarious. The Reese's home was down the hill, the last street before Neshaminy Creek. And if you come back here to the map, this Neshaminy Creek was like right running here. And that was like the boundary line between us and the next township over. So I think like we were like living right in here, I think, this area. Neshaminy Creek had a remnant of Neshaminy woods that remained across the street from them and did little to protect their home when the creek would sometimes rise. During this time, my curious mind was busy absorbing Jeff's deep knowledge about random car engines and hunting skills, things I knew nothing about. So therefore, I was very involved in listener mode, like trying to learn something I didn't know about. So I had no idea when I was at their house that Mrs. Reese was simultaneously working on this book, compiling the history of Bensalem for publication 2 years later. She was perfectly positioned for this project as she had previously served full-time as the first female township supervisor for Bensalem. I recall being quite intimidated by this daunting, accomplished woman, and it was not until I found a used copy of her book in 2022 that I became aware of her diligent efforts in the publishing arena. Ironically, I remember Jeff sarcastically referring to his mom's historical society as the Hysterical Society. And it is surreal sitting here now valuing his mother's productivity from 40 years ago, especially now that I just lost my mother. It is funny how so many things our mothers do to annoy us until they are no longer here. And then we can suddenly understand their far-seeing wisdom and observe its far-reaching impact, as in the case of both of our mothers' books, my mother and Jeff's mother. This is true even though I myself am a mother. It is like mothers are all on a mission to preserve their progeny regardless of the outcomes, and even if that means nagging and unreasonable expectations for our own. But finally, we can see clearly and understand our mother's love for each one of us. But back to how Bensalem Township got its name. One of the first English immigrants assigned township land by Penn, William Penn, meaning, was Joseph Groudon. So Pennsylvania is named, we'll get into a little bit more, for the famous Quaker William Penn, who was granted, and this is a whole other story I want to do in I think a different episode, but his father, Admiral William Penn, was granted the land um, to repay a debt to the king that the king owed Penn. That's in the whole interesting story. Groudon was one of the Quakers that Penn gave Bensalem to. And Groudon named his home Bensalem Manor. Who was this guy, Joseph Groudon? I knew he was a wealthy merchant family in Cornwall, England, and his father's business was a pewterer. And a pewterer is someone that makes pewter, Pewter, which uses tin and other metals as a mix that was like safe to drink and use and like out of, and was more sturdy than other base metals. I leave off here. According to Mrs. Reese's book, the township was first named just Salem, and that Salem means peace in Hebrew. So maybe there's a connection to Salem in Massachusetts, but I haven't looked into that yet. Then somewhere between 1692 and 1697, it appears that the Groudons added the word Ben to the front, making it Bensalem. In Hebrew, Ben means son of. So now the expanded meaning is son of peace. So who was the son of peace? Bensalem was primarily founded by 12 original landowners, mostly wealthy Quaker farmers and businessmen from England. We'll come back here from this Cornwall. So it kind of makes sense that they'd come over as a pack and they would all know each other from here. At least one of them was a secret Catholic, faking Quakerism. And he even used an alias so he could get a coveted land grant from the Quakers. So it's like the land grab, like, okay, you're all Quakers, son of peace, but it's all about the land. But that's a whole other fodder for another story. And the whole fact of using Hebrew, Bensalem, it can't be attributed to a Hebrew diaspora at that point in time because none of them were Jewish, they were all Quakers. But it's a Hebrew, two words used. Which ties back again to this whole Arimathea connection with Cornwall. The current belief still held today by the township at large is that the land recipients were probably referring to William Penn, the founder of Pennsylvania, as the son of peace. Bensalem was the son of peace, and they're giving credit to William Penn, who was sagely doling out swaths of fertile land to them, the chosen Quaker few. He was the Quaker pacifist, son of peace. Bensalem is named for him, or so it goes, that theory. However, when you get into the detail of it, Groudon, the primary landowner of these 12 Quakers, was like fighting with him constantly that he didn't have enough land. So, I mean, he didn't necessarily think that that he was in agreement with Penn, so I don't know if they would necessarily honor him. It's a definitely good theory, better than none. However, there are some practical holes, and I'd like to fill that in. This is my go back to my notes now. Quite accidentally, I stumbled upon my own circumstantial theory after puzzling together a number of random facts and circumstances I've come across the last couple of years. And it's connecting the name Bensalem to the secret society members who were aware of Sir Francis Bacon's writings and his book that we were talking about, The Voyage to the Land of the Rosicrucians. And I think it's interesting that Bacon didn't have his friend publish it until he was dead. So like no one could attack him. So like to me, that means that there's a lot more stuff in there that's not just it's not just a fantasy novel story. This summer, oh, okay, this is in like 2022. So maybe 2 years ago, I was listening to an esoteric episode on the Dark Journalist YouTube channel with Dr. Joseph P. Farrell. Farrell is an Oxford scholar who earned his doctorate in I can't say this, patricity, which is the study of the founding fathers of the early Christian church. Which would be like around the 300s, I think, primarily. But, I think they started fighting even earlier, but the Nicene Creed with Constantine, I think that was all 333. But anyway, he's a genius. Farrell is. Farrell and DJ on Dark Journalists were theorizing about what Sir Francis Bacon may have coded into his novella, The New Atlantis, after describing its initial secretive publishing method. Bacon, a brilliant and a controversial figure at the center of a number of conundrums, wrote this fantasy novella. Excuse me, I'm going to pause for a minute so I can cough. Sorry about that. I have allergies, so I have a little cough drop in my throat. Okay. Sir Francis Bacon was a brilliant, controversial figure at the center of a number of conundrums. And he wrote this fantasy quote novella about a utopian imaginary society of peace on an island far away on the Pacific Ocean, on the way from Peru towards Japan, which is interesting because there is a connection between Peru and Japan. Even in recent times, there was a Japanese prime minister or president of Peru who was actually a Japanese citizen. So that's kind of interesting. And there's like I think they have DNA connections now between the two. There's something ancient with that. That type of knowledge was at the level of state secrets in Europe. Bacon was in a high position of power for most of his adult English life, so he would have access that the common man would not. So I decided it was high time for me to download this book onto my Kindle so I can see it for myself, as I was aware of it but had never really flipped through it. Bacon's book tells the story of the discovery of an imaginary, utopian island society somewhere in the vast Pacific Ocean. And guess what this society was called? Bensalem. You could have knocked me over with a feather. I started laughing. Now, I already knew about our most famous Philadelphia citizen, Benjamin Franklin. And I knew he was a Grand Master in another secret society, the Freemasons. And Franklin's like 100 years after this. He's at the Revolutionary War. So he wasn't around. He's like 150 years after this book. Ben Franklin was even the Grand Master of two lodges at the same time, Philadelphia and Paris in France, the Mother Lodge. So I was not surprised by the secret society connection, but I wanted to see if I could draw the connection closer. So there's some names that connect here between the two places. These are some more of the connections. It's hard to see with all these like little, you know, stores and stuff popped up on here, but there's an area called Trevose, and that goes back to Cornwall as well. So there's a Trevose over here. There's a Penryn in both places. Pen equals headland in the Cornish tongue from one of the um, surveys that I looked at. There's a place called Padstow. There's something with silver. They have a Cornish hurling ball, like an ancient kind of field hockey sport where they would run around with this sterling ball. It's sterling silver, hammered into two hemispheres and then bound around a cord of applewood held together with screws or nails through a band of silver. It's very kind of interesting, but that was a little ancient Cornish tradition. Okay. So this his novella was first secretly published in 1630, about 3 months after Francis Bacon died. It was a non-disclosed pamphlet, and it was inside of his scientific work, Silva Silvarum, A Natural History in 10 Centuries. Beyond the obvious theme of history, it seems to also present a philosophical framework to raise one's own consciousness, according to at least one academic who studied the work. But it was not until 1670, about 40 years later, that the New Atlantis, Francis Bacon's book here, was independently registered as a publication. So even for 40 years, this was like a book secretly published to get it around to other people without anyone knowing that it was being published. So, because I guess there was like such new kind of information that it would be scary and maybe people would be arrested and killed for it like they were for other books at that time. So if we just look at the timing, it suggests a lot of secrecy and therefore protection of knowledge considered important for the few to make sure it didn't get destroyed. So now it's finally registered as its own book, publicly known in 1670. So now 1682, the township becomes Bensalem over in America with the Quakers from Cornwall. And Francis Bacon has a connection to Cornwall that I think if I don't write about it, I'll end up talking about it. But why was the New Atlantis still considered so dangerous to publish, even posthumously? Perhaps it was because it was revealing some of Bacon's own views on developing new technologies? Or was it just a threat to the establishment? Bacon's characters reveal that the utopian society of Bensalem had a secret scientific school called Salomon, or Solomon's House. This could be a veiled reference to the secret society of Solomonic magic that, yes, actual people still attempt practicing today. You can listen to George describe his withdrawal from dabbling in this form of dark magic on his YouTube show, The Reveal Report. People have spent their lives as academic scholars writing on Bacon's life and written works. I am certainly not one of them. I'm just connecting dots between places, names, and people's relationships. The Commonwealth of Pennsylvania is a territory organized community around under one government. And Commonwealth is still its legal designation for an independent territory, country, or community. So Pennsylvania is still not labeled a state. It's not the state of Pennsylvania, it's the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, just like Kentucky, Massachusetts, and Virginia. So there's four of the United States that aren't states, they're commonwealths. And if you read Wikipedia, it'll say oh, they're just, or the state's website, it's just the same thing. It doesn't really mean anything different. But Commonwealth is definitely tied to something to do with the crown and the Commonwealth. So I'm waiting for that to still step forward and be revealed. Okay. So how did Francis Bacon know these place names and their general locations? What map was he using? If it was just a fantasy, why was it so dangerous that he had to hide the information? In 1694, it is also believed by the Rosicrucian organization, AMORC, or AMORC, I guess, that Bacon would have influenced a settlement of mystics in North America, stating that the New Atlantis inspired a colony of Rosicrucians led by Johannes Kelpius to journey across the Atlantic Ocean in a chartered vessel called Sarah Maria. And they moved on to Pennsylvania in the late 1700s. So it's that same time period, late 1600s. 17th century or 1600s. According to their claims, these Rosicrucian communities made valuable contributions to the newly emerging American culture in the fields of printing, philosophy, the science, and the arts. So that was Johann Kelpius. So now, 60 years after Bacon's work was published, Joseph Groudon and the other Quaker founders formed their township in Bensalem. Indirectly, this seems to indicate that they were members of the same secret circles, or at least had access to this arcane knowledge. It's now believed by a number of experts on the secret societies that Sir Francis Bacon was probably the leader of the Rosicrucians who preserved knowledge protected by these mystery schools, like his prescient understanding of the globe's geography. So it seems logical that these 12 Quakers had access to some of that info and used the name to hide something in plain sight. A crossroads and meeting place at a minimum. Others would know about it. We know Ben Franklin was the Grand Master of the Philadelphia and Paris Masonic temples. He came later, but he came. This is weird. Ben Franklin came and spent a lot of time in Bensalem. So yes, his house, which I had been in Center City, Philadelphia, is like where he officially uh, lived, down in Center City. See if I can show you that. Like here we go, right here. And here's Ben. So there's, like, that's really cool, right? So that's William Penn, Philadelphia City Hall, but that's William Penn on the top. And he's actually looking towards Bensalem or towards England. Like he's looking northeast. Maybe not north, he's looking more northeast. Okay, and then here's Bensalem up here. So a lot of the wealthy Philadelphians had manors along the river up here, and they would leave during the summer and go up there to get away from the riffraff. Excuse me. Okay. One of the 12 original male recipients from William Penn's land grant of Bensalem was Joseph Groudon. So we know he's the son of the wealthy pewterer from Cornwall. It was technically his father, Lawrence, that was the owner, but the father never left England. He stayed in Cornwall and was like the money backing his adult son's move into Bensalem. Then there was a whole bunch of slow walking by William Penn and the actual legal conveyance of title to the Groudons to finalize their agreement. This apparently soured the friendship between William Penn and the Groudons altogether. And on its face, the actual implementation did not seem quite as peaceful nor Quakerish than conceptually. Then in another not so peaceful move, there seemed to be more bickering between the father and son Groudon team, so much so that when the father Lawrence died back in England, he cut his son Joseph out of the will and left the British inheritance all to the grandson. This is still back before America was a country and still subject to the whimsy of the Royal British Crown. Meanwhile, over here in Bensalem, Joseph Groudon, despite his Quaker pacifist roots, was on a lifelong land grab, trying to gobble up as much of Bensalem as he could. He added on a part down on the Delaware River that was later named after his hometown in England, Cornwall. Cornwall. So were looking at that earlier. So right down in here, Cornwall Heights. Then Groudon got into a long legal fray with one of the other 12, John Gray, which was the alias for the secret Catholic, also known as John Tatham. It's like, the same stuff going on today. The Quaker meeting notes and private correspondence is quite amusing about how poorly and unbusinesslike these two men behaved in public over their property disputes. There is another note about Groudon getting the daughter of a neighbor pregnant when he was a widower in between wives. So needless to say, there didn't seem a lot of peace happening in Bensalem from the get-go. Well, at least when the English showed up, or Quaker or not. Before them, it appeared that this peninsula piece of land was very much more peaceful when the Unami clan, UNAMI, the Unami clan of the Lenni Lenape tribe made it their home. And it's Lenni, Lenni. Lenape is how I believe they say it, and I grew up saying Lenape, Lenape. The Lenni Lenape tribe made it their home. Unami means turtle, one of the three animal totems of the Lenape. This is interesting because some of the old Indian histories call America Turtle Island. When the world was flooded with water, the ancient Appalachia was the island of safety, represented by the turtle shell. Also interesting is that the Lenni Lenape is defined as the original people, or quote, the true people. According to the tribe's historians like Chuck Brooks, the Lenape tradition was that their tribe lived in the Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware areas for about 10,000 years. Like in the flood stories that exist around the world at the same approximate epoch. The other tribes called them, meaning the Lenapes, the grandfathers. And the other tribes would come to them, the Lenapes, for conflict resolution because they were the third party arbitrators. They were known for that. So they were the grandfathers, like considered the oldest tribes by the other tribes. Did you ever stop and think about how many water sources, states, and places still bear the names that were ascribed to them, the indigenous peoples? Humans have committed the deep sin of genocide, but the names remain with our anglicized phonetic spellings. In Florida, Okeechobee and Kissimmee, out west, the Dakotas, Tennessee. The ancients saw water as feminine and land as masculine. So there was energy in places and water. In the case of Bensalem, it's surrounded by water on three sides. The Pequessing Creek separates it from Philadelphia on the south, and Pequessing is an Indian name. Neshaminy Creek separates it from the rest of Bucks County on the right, and the Delaware River serves as its natural boundary from New Jersey. The two creeks are Indian names, and Delaware had been assigned to local tribes, but it was really a bastardized version of a general's name, later assigned to the Lenape remnant remaining in Delaware. So the Delaware Indians is like really like it was a name of I think an English general called Delaware, or maybe it was French, I forget. But and then that was kind of assigned to them by the English. The first Europeans showing up in the Bensalem Peninsula was around 1670s, but there was also Swedes and Dutch that were there before the English. The Swedes came, at least documented wise, in 1638 to the Wilmington, Delaware area, which is going to be another episode. Um, so the Swedes were probably in this area as well in that same time frame, like the 1630s. So I think it makes sense if you think about Eric the Red and the Vikings coming over 1400s, that it makes sense that they were there in this area for a long time too. The first And then the English documented that they were there in 1638. In Freemasonry, redirecting the energies of water is a recurring theme. Their fingerprints are on the canals and dams redirecting water for their own purposes. Bensalem in Pennsylvania is not quite an island like Francis Bacon's Pacific utopian isle, but did its physical formation also attribute to the naming convention because it's surrounded by water on three sides? The land was rich and fertile, and the fish, according to legend, could be raked out of the creek. There were so many. So this goes back, we think about the Indians, they were of this higher level of consciousness where they knew if they served one another, they made themselves better. The Penn Treaty was made with these Indians, the Lenni Lenape and William Penn. I'm going to get back. Now, these are my notes about William Penn creating subdivisions. I'm going to get, this is a little bit of his story. I think I'm going to set this one up in the next episode because there's a lot of detail there. This is a lot to take in, but I wanted to get this on the record about this Cornwall connection. Also in this area, King Arthur is known. Those stories are all tied to Cornwall. There's also coming back to Dark Journalist. He makes the connection with the Tuaoi stones and Atlantic, the Atlantis, the old Atlantis, that some of them are potentially connected to here, buried here, when there was when the old Atlantis was destroyed. So that's kind of interesting too. Okay, so we covered a lot. Give a little credit to Nana. Thank you, Nana, for getting this information to me. And we're working on this Cornish connection to America.